Welcome to the Kimberlite webinar that take a comprehensive look at the hydraulic fracturing services market. My name is David Batt, the president of Kimberlite Research, and I'd like to welcome you to our 44th Kimberlite webinar conducted on behalf of the oil and gas operators around the world who participate in our industry studies. These webinars are provided as a professional courtesy to the many oil and gas operators who support the industry research. In past webinars, we've provided you market updates on artificial lift, completions, perforating, interventions, even subsea. And most recently, we took a look at the drilling services market. For those of you that are not as familiar with Kimberlite Research, I give a brief explanation and background of Kimberlite, and then we'll just dive right in. Each year, Kimberlite conducts about 3,000 interviews around the world, talking to oil and gas operators globally. About half of our research is North America and half is international. We produce a series of reports interviewing geologists, G&G folks, drilling engineers, subsea, completion, and production. Today, we'll be talking about the hydraulic fracturing report. These interviews were recently conducted in May and June of 2024, based on interviews with 167 completion engineers and managers worldwide from 110 different E&P operators. The performance trends that we'll be sharing with you, since we update this report every year since 2016, are based on interviews with 2,000 completion engineers and completion managers and over 30,000 supplier performance ratings. The data set's rich and multidimensional. In this exhibit, we cross-plot supplier performance on the x-axis versus pricing competitiveness on the y-axis. I'll explain the four quadrants and then dive in. Any oilfield service company supplier, based on customer reviews from the operators that plots in the top right-hand quadrant, they're viewed as a premium supplier, cost more but worth it. Bottom left, a discount provider, maybe underperforming industry average, but attractive pricing makes them a good value. Get what you pay for. You can see the fair value fairway running from the northeast corner all the way down to the southwest corner. Any oilfield service company provider in the bottom right-hand quadrant is viewed as a value advantage supplier. And those oilfield service company suppliers are positioned in the best position to grow and expand share. Any oilfield service company supplier that is competitively positioned in the top left-hand quadrant based on customer reviews is being challenged competitively and has an opportunity to either improve performance and move to the right, or maybe reduce their pricing down and they get back into the fair value fairway. As many of you know, I began my career working at Chevron, and I know the challenges that oil and gas operators have in conducting due diligence and selecting the best suppliers and best value for their operations. I recognize that oil companies are typically looking for oilfield service company suppliers that are consistent performers, typically performing at least industry average performance or maybe better, or delivering appropriate value for the services that they bring. So with that, why don't we just go ahead and dive in and take a look at the market. To kick things off, let's take a look and see where investment spending is looking. If you focus on the right-hand part of this chart, 2024, you'll find that 66% of the U.S. land operators are planning to keep their hydraulic fracturing expenditures pretty well steady and flat over the next 12 months. You can see that the diffusion index is a very flat 51, and we're actually showing some contraction in the market in the Permian Basin because the index is 45. When you look at the sentiment trends over time by basin, you do see that some of the gassy basins like the Marcellus that went into deep contraction as natural gas prices collapsed. You are seeing some beliefs that maybe natural gas pricing and fundamentals will improve going into 2025. And you see them kind of going up. The major oil companies tend to be a little bit more resilient than the large independents. When you look at the drilling activity for 2025 versus 24, what we find is that the U.S. land operators are reporting that they plan to drill 1% to 2% fewer wells in 2025 versus 24. That's a stark improvement from the 9% fewer wells that we're drilling this year, when we may end up down 10% wells. Canada's growing pretty good on year, about 3% every year, and growth internationally is still very strong. We expect the second half of 2024 to be relatively flat in the U.S. When we look at pricing, overall pricing for hydraulic fracturing over the next 12 months is expected to be down marginally, about 0.5%. 49% or half of the oil companies in U.S. land expect pricing to remain flat over the next 12 months. 1 in 3, 32% expect a price decrease, and 19%, nearly 1 in 5 expected increase. We're clearly seeing a differentiation in the marketplace. Suppliers such as Halliburton, Liberty, and others that have differentiated technologies and differentiated service quality levels tend to be more resilient and be able to charge more for their electric frac fleets, say, for example, or their dual fuel Tier 4 digital fleets versus those of conventional diesel. Therefore, you see this little segmentation of the market right here between the operators that are maybe going to pay a little bit more to get this added efficiency put into their system versus those that maybe be focusing more on conventional diesels. You can see in the United States land market how we went from contraction in COVID on the pricing, but then the price recovery kind of stepped up rather strongly, but since then has been relatively flattish. 2/3 of the contracting in the United States, 62% roughly, is charged on a per unit of activity, be it pumping hours or horsepowers, and about 28% a hybrid model. The big dynamics in the United States land market today are basically the fact that we're drilling longer laterals, so more footage is being drilled per well, and we're drilling these wells in about 2.9% fewer days. So the lateral lengths are increasing by 3%, by about 3%, but the days to drill them are also going down 2.9%. Longer laterals means that we're also fracking more stages that you see here on the bottom left. But we're also completing these wells much more quickly. So what's kind of driving this market? What we find is the use of rotary steerables is increasing up to 38%, up from 20% in 2016. And half the time, the oil and gas operators are able to drill the lateral on a single run, save some tripping out to swap out a bit or a mud motor. Think of the significance of that to the oil and gas operators. If you happen to be a Tier 1 oil and gas operator and you're going to drill 100 or 300 wells a year, and you can drill the laterals all in a single run, you just saved 100 to 300 days of drilling. That's enough to drill 10 to 30 additional wells with no additional CapEx cost. Again, that's a great example of how leveraging the efficiencies of drilling, completion, and production far outweigh trying to squeeze another 1 or 2% out of your suppliers, but rather collaborating with your suppliers to drive those efficiencies in the field that far outweigh any cost differential. We're also seeing that the increase in self-oriented perforating is increasing rather sharply. Oil and gas operators report that the use of self-oriented perforating guns is allowing them to reach pump pressure faster, less pump time, therefore using less water and chemicals, but also improving the productivity of the wellbores. And we're using larger ESPs for longer periods of time to increase our productivity and production in the United States. All of this is resulting in our ability in the United States to maintain very high production levels at historic highs, even though the rig count and drilling activity has actually been declining. We also find that the average cost to frac a well is going up because even though prices are relatively flat, drilling longer laterals and more frac stages adds additional costs for proppant, chemicals, and for pump time. Simultaneous hydraulic fracturing is a huge contributor to the completion efficiencies. In the 22 survey here on the left-hand side, 1 in 5 or 22% of the respondents indicated that they use hydraulic fracturing, and that has now grown to nearly 1 in 3 of respondents at 31%. The efficiencies realized by the oil and gas operators are now up and reported at 35%, very significant. We also find that most oil and gas operators prefer dual fuel, followed by conventional diesel and electric. But for the operators that really prefer dual fuel and electric, they really tend to be the Tier 1 operators that are looking to drive completion efficiency to the next level. In the Permian Basin here at the bottom, you can see that the large oil and gas operators that drill more than 100 plus wells, they only prefer dual fuel and electric. There's no diesel. Conversely, if you look at the top right-hand part of this PowerPoint chart, you'll notice that the operators that drill less than 20 wells in the U.S. land on average are really fairly open to the use of diesel. So again, we're seeing a huge bifurcation in the market between the large tier one operators that are really focused on high completion intensity, trying to drive efficiencies to the next level, and some of the smaller operators that are more inclined and comfortable taking more of a conventional route to complete their wells. ESG sentiment continues to be somewhat moderate. Most of the E investment is around emissions monitoring reduction. I thought this statement kind of summarized the operator's perspective as it relates to ESG. They certainly want to, operate all their facilities very environmentally responsibly and to follow regulations. And they're going to monitor emissions and reduce emissions, and they're going to focus more on electrification and dual fuel and reduction of flaring. Halliburton is identified as being that supplier the best able to help the U.S. land operators to meet their ESG objectives in the hydraulic fracturing market. And probably to no surprise, as you know, Halliburton's also a leader in their e-fleet technology. Bundling is fairly prevalent for chemicals. 69% of the chemicals are bundled with the pump supplier, where about 52% of the profits bundled with the pumping supplier. Perforating is bundled with the pumping supplier about 1/3 of the time. Now, naturally, not all frac pumping suppliers have perforating capabilities, but Halliburton, Exterior, Liberty, and Pro Petro all have these capabilities and very commonly pair up their pumping services at least 50% of the time. But in aggregate, it makes up about 1/3 of the market. Water consumption continues to increase, as you see in the top left-hand part of this chart, as we drill longer laterals and frac more stages, and the use of recycled water in the bottom left-hand part of the chart is also increasing, and it's up to 62% in the Permian Basin. Solaris has the efficient silos, 6-pack and 12-packs, that makes up about 1/3 of the market share, and boxes make up the rest. But we are beginning to pick up some operators that are just electing to do sand piles and to eliminate the use of boxes and silos entirely. The number one improvement that operators want to see from their frac suppliers is improved reliability and uptime, and to improve on maintenance, because as I mentioned earlier, in order to drive completion efficiency to the next level, you're finding these operators pumping 8-10 stages a day, basically pumping 21, 22 hours a day. So as you're pumping around the clock 24/7 virtually, that just places a whole bunch of stress on your preventive maintenance program and the ability to maintain operability of the equipment. Frac iron automation and remote actuation continues to gain interest by the oil and gas operators. As you can see by nearly 3/4 of them, is they would like to get the personnel out of the red zone. Leaders in this space, naturally, Halliburton and Liberty, but you see a lot of smaller specialty providers with Downing's Freedom Series and Technip F&C, CyberFrac, Intelligent Wellhead Systems, and Force. And there's others, not to mention Schlumberger, of course. Dissolvable plugs will continue to grow as we drill longer laterals. And lastly, the United States refracturing market is continuing to grow. This is also contributing to the increased production that we see in the United States land market, even though we're not drilling any additional wells, further aggravating the observation that production continues to remain elevated, even though rig activity and rig count continues to decline. When it comes to frac trees, we just recently published this report this week. We see that it's a very fragmented market with 39 different suppliers. Schlumberger Cameron is the market share leader. Other suppliers have a pretty relevant presence in the marketplace, be it Technip F&C, Downing, Force, Oil States, and Vault. When you look at the competitive landscape, what you find is Cameron and Technip F&C are really kind of those premium-based suppliers, and Oil States is also viewed as delivering very solid value. A whole host of these specialty providers are viewed in the value advantage quadrant. Downing's performance has declined in terms of availability and service, whereas Cactus's performance continues to decline year on year and really doesn't appear to be really emphasizing this particular sector very much as they focus on their flexible pipe and their core business, the surface wellheads. Turning our attention to the overall market brand image of the market, what we find is that Halliburton has the strongest brand image as being a leader for technology, technical support, and having the best downhole measurements. They're also viewed as being a premium supplier, cost more but worth it. Halliburton is not viewed as being a low-cost provider, as you can see by the negative correlation. Liberty challenges Halliburton for strength in their market brand image. In just about every category and attribute that we're tracking here at Kimberlite, Liberty is viewed as a leader, also viewed as a premium provider. Next year has some brand image deficits along with ProFrac, and companies like CalFrac are mostly known for being a low-cost discount provider with pretty good field personnel. The 0% line means that CalFrac's customers believe that they're a leader and a solid performer in this area. Again, negative correlations indicate that they're not viewed as a leader. So when you sum it up, it's very clear that Halliburton in red and Liberty in green, they're viewed as the leaders in the marketplace for technology, best technical support, best real-time subsurface frac measurements, premium-based supplier, cost more but worth it. You also find that Liberty Energy also is viewed as having leadership in best field service performance. CalFrac is mentioned and recognized as being a low-cost provider. When we start to turn our attention to the competitive landscape, what we find is that the market has consolidated nicely since 2016. In 2016, we had a whole bunch of different suppliers, 31 different suppliers, of which really no supplier other than Halliburton really made up a material share of the market share. Today, we're down to 19 suppliers. The market is contracted, and the big four suppliers, Liberty, Halliburton, ProFrac, and NexTier, comprise 75% of the market. This consolidation brings all types of benefits to the oil and gas operators. These four suppliers now have strong enough balance sheets to invest in next generation technology to help the tier one oil and gas operators take completion efficiency to the next level. A lot of the smaller operators that are okay with conventional diesel fleets typically use one of these smaller specialty providers that tend to be, in many cases, a little bit more diesel centric. When we look at the performance review ratings by the oil and gas operators on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being really good performance and 1 being really bad performance, we see no evidence in the eyes of the oil and gas operators that all the frac suppliers are performing at the same level. In fact, if we were to go in and start to take a look interactively in the United States land, we would find that the responsiveness to needs ratings have improved in the most recent years. And you can also see that Liberty Energy tends to get the highest customer reviews. Halliburton is improving. NexTier is showing really strong improvement along with ProFrac. When we move into equipment quality and reliability, what we find is that the ratings kind of leveled off from 23 to 24. This is an area of strength for Halliburton and for Liberty, and we're also seeing NexTier maintain strong performance that meets industry expectations. ProFrac is improving year on year, which is good, and their just performance is slightly below industry expectation, whereas the small specialty providers that we just spoke about tend to be a lot smaller, and in many cases a little bit more maybe not a strong balance sheet to be able to maintain their equipment, and therefore their performance is a bit below. If I were to continue on field service, you would see that field service ratings continue to remain stable and strong. Again, that's a strength for Halliburton and Liberty, NexTier, and ProFrac. The all others and the small ones are showing some decline. When we get into the all important areas of completion efficiency, they're continuing to increase. Halliburton's clearly a leader in this segment, along with Liberty. NexTier is also improving quite strongly as they upgrade their fleets. ProFrac has kind of leveled off and stabilized on their completion efficiency, which tends to correlate a little bit to their equipment reliability. And then the all others and the smaller suppliers tend to struggle the most in this category, which is why a lot of the smaller oil and gas operators that don't drill that many wells tend to gravitate towards these smaller suppliers. When you take a look at pricing, you can see that the pricing competitiveness ratings went down. I think the oil and gas operators recognize that even though we had 12, 13% decline in rig count, the pricing for hydraulic fracturing on a contractual basis really didn't decline that much. The spot market was quite soft, but if you're an oil and gas operator and you're really looking for the best overall value, it's very clear when you look at the value map in the United States land market. And if you look at the big four, you have a very differentiated market with Liberty Energy showing great value and performance leadership. Halliburton's a premium provider, and where Halliburton shines the most is when you go into the Permian Basin. And when you do that, you start to see Halliburton move into a really nice position of cost more but worth it positioning. If we expand our sample a little bit, you'll find that in the Permian Basin, you've got ProPetro, Liberty, the pure play electric provider, Evolution Well Services, and Halliburton all showing performance leadership. If you do a quick head-to-head of Halliburton, say versus, let's do Liberty here in the Permian Basin, what you'll find is that Halliburton performs strongly and compares favorably to Liberty. Halliburton has the edge on completion efficiency, and Liberty has the edge on technical support. When you do Halliburton versus Evolution in the Permian Basin, again, Halliburton has the edge on both field service execution and completion efficiency. So again, you can start to see the strength that we see in the marketplace of Halliburton in the Permian Basin. If you go to the United States land and you look at the operators drilling more than 100 wells, again, you start to see how Halliburton and Liberty stand out. Even in the Permian Basin, as I mentioned, Halliburton, Liberty, ProPetro, and Evolution that's missing from here are some of the top performers. Obviously, STEP is well positioned as a good value. And amongst the large operators in the Permian Basin, we clearly see differentiated value and performance. So if you're an oil and gas operator, again, there's no evidence based on the feedback of your peers that all the hydraulic fracturing suppliers are performing at the same level. In fact, what we find is if you go back to United States land for a second, there are many discount providers. There's STEP, there's Fly-In, there's CalFrac, there's CUD. There's so many options available to you as an operator that I really encourage you to really engage and collaborate with the many suppliers with whom you have the option to use and learn about their strengths and weaknesses. Tie that into your operational objectives of what you're trying to accomplish and find the best value, the best fit, so that the supplier will succeed in serving you and you will succeed in executing your project. You can see that the oil and gas operators that prefer diesel to frac their wells, diesel frac fleets, they see more of a commoditized profile. Everyone performs very similarly, big difference in pricing strategies, whereas operators who prefer dual fuel see very similar pricing strategies amongst the top four big players, but they see a big difference in overall performance levels. The electric operators who prefer to use electric, if possible, really prefer Liberty first and Halliburton second. And then those operators who have the most efficient completion operations, the average day to complete a well in the U.S. is 7.8 days. But for those operators who can complete their wells in 7 days or less, see a clear differentiated market with Liberty as the best value, followed by Halliburton, NexTier, and ProFrac. The oil and gas operators that tend to disproportionately bundle their activities for proppant chemicals and perforating services, again, see differentiated value amongst Liberty, NexTier, and Halliburton. In Canada, it's a very competitive landscape. STEP Energy is viewed as a really strong value. Trican is a premium provider along with Halliburton and Liberty. CalFrac consistently viewed as delivering solid value year on year in the Canadian province. Internationally, it's the big three. If you take a look at wireline perforating and hydraulic fracturing, the perforating report will be coming out next week. We find that Liberty Energy's perforating in green, their competitive position and performance has been improving year on year. And in the eyes of the oil and gas operators, their hydraulic fracturing and their perforating are both very much value accretive. Halliburton's perforating continues to improve year on year, but continues to be a bit challenged relative to that of Liberty Energy. Next year has historically had great alignment between their pumping operations and perforating operations, but most recently they've seen some recent declines in service and support. ProPetro acquired Silvertip about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and Silvertip's performance is very strong in the Permian Basin and correlates quite nicely to ProPetro's pumping operations. We commonly see that some oil and gas operators really prefer to use price as their big delineator in selection of a supplier. But for those who really focus on differentiating technology or service, you typically see differentiated value, where you've got companies like Liberty and Halliburton that kind of stand out for delivering differentiated service, whereas in many cases, you get some of the smaller specialty providers that are preferred for price. I think overall, I would expect to see just a little bit more consolidation in the market. You've got Evolution, who's a pure play electric provider that would be a really nice asset to a company that is lacking in electric assets. And I think you've got a lot of smaller specialty, really heavily biased towards conventional diesel fleets, be it Fly-N-A, STEP, CalFrac, Cut, and others, that may benefit from joining forces and building a stronger balance sheet to allow an investment in next generation technologies. So with that said, I really would like to thank all of you for attending the webinar. Kimberlite next week will be publishing completion fluids and perforating, and later in August, we'll be publishing our reports on artificial lift, such as rod lift, ESP, gas lift, plunger lift, as well as updates on production chemicals. If any of you that are listening or see this webinar who are oil and gas operators that would like to participate in our artificial lift studies or our upcoming intervention studies that we'll be conducting in the fall, please reach out and talk to us. We'd love to capture your feedback and include you in our industry research. Again, I want to thank everyone for your attendance. Please reach out to discuss with any questions, and I hope you have a great weekend ahead. Thank you. Bye now.